In other news, Belarus's President Alexander Lukashenko is currently visiting Beijing. He's met his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Now, it's a meeting of two close allies of Russian President Vladimir Putin at a significant time as Russia's invasion of Ukraine enters its second year. It also comes as Beijing floats its peace plan to ending the war. We can now go across to France 24's Yena Lee standing by in Beijing. Yena, what's this visit really about?
Well, officially, this is a visit to develop the two countries' relationship. Belarus and China have had diplomatic ties for over 3 decades. And just last September, actually, they upgraded their relationship, signing what they called an all-weather strategic partnership. Now, this visit is all about making this all much more concrete with deals and cooperation agreements. Now, this is a state visit, which means Beijing has rolled out the red carpet for President Lukashenko. And Lukashenko reportedly, for example, visited Tiananmen Square earlier Tuesday, and he laid a wreath on the monument to the people's heroes. And of course, he has had this sit-down with President Xi Jinping. For Lukashenko, this is clearly an opportunity for him to find and diversify his economic partners. His country is heavily reliant on Russia. And of course, the regime in Minsk faces an array of international sanctions itself. For Beijing, Minsk is an old friend, like I mentioned earlier. It's also an early adopter of the Belt and Road Initiative, and Minsk is a partner with whom Beijing can condemn the so-called meddling of internal affairs and also condemn the use of sanctions as a way to do geopolitics.
And Yena, you mentioned that Beijing is really rolling out the red carpet, or has rolled out the red carpet. This is it floats its peace plan to ending the war in Ukraine.
Well, last Friday, Beijing actually published a document laying out its position on the war in Ukraine, if you will. And in it, Beijing calls for a ceasefire, for peace talks. They say that the use of nuclear weapons is bad. They say that sanctions are bad and that war really benefits no one. All of this is nothing particularly new. There were no calls for Russia to retreat from Ukrainian territory. There was no condemnation of Moscow for invading Ukraine. What was interesting, though, is that President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine reacted to this document, saying that he would like to discuss it with his Chinese counterpart. No news or updates from the Chinese side regarding this. Instead, what we have right now is this visit by President Lukashenko, a staunch Putin ally in Beijing as we speak. And in fact, President Xi hasn't spoken with President Zelensky since the start of the war, at least on record, whereas he has spoken with President Putin on a number of occasions, and even the two men met face-to-face on the sidelines of an international summit. So China really wants to brand itself as a neutral potential mediator, and might I add, Lukashenko himself too, perhaps not so neutral, but at least as a mediator in this conflict. But for many observers, especially in the West, this neutrality argument has become increasingly tenuous.
Yena, thank you very much for that. Yena Lee reporting there for us from Beijing.